You can see my full screen now.
Now I'm sharing my screen. So
okay.
To pass the ball to you shortly.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. Firstly, let me thank all the partners for taking the time today to join today's session for the Cloud ACI training. But I hope everyone will be able to walk away with some understanding of the solution in terms of how we are trying to connect different multi-clouds together using Cloud ACI. And today's training will be quite an intensive hands-on training, so really appeal to everyone to be focused through today's session as much as you can, so that you'll be able to go through the labs smoothly. All right, so Kwai Sing will be here to help you any point of time, right, as well as William and myself. Right, so I won't delay any further. We have a very tight schedule, and I'd like to pass the time over to Kwai Sing. Right, thanks, Kwai Sing. Let me pass the ball to you now.
Sure. For the time. Let me share my screen. Okay. You can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, good morning all. Welcome for this Cloud ACI getting started. Okay, so by all means, this session, the intention is to make it very easy for you to understand what value that Cisco Cloud ACI brings to your customer. And also to uncover some of the myths about, when I want to do anything like Cloud ACI, do I need to have on-prem data center? Okay, my customer scenario is as this: how can Cloud ACI help? So we want to address that kind of question that you may have, and also to let you walk through how you can go about connecting resources in the multi-cloud environment, so that I can put some database instance in AWS, put it on-prem, some of them in Azure, and I can interconnect them easily using the Cloud ACI solution. So I think today we'll go through some of that, and of course, I do not intend to have a lot of content based on PowerPoint. It's going to be heavily focused on hands-on experience, whereby you can go about experiencing, right? How you can bring out the entire Cloud ACI, how you can connect stuff, and how you can see this working, and how you can see what you do today can be a very good resemblance of what your customers may be encountering. And this is a possibility where I think it's beneficial for everyone here, right? For yourself, for your company, for Cisco, for your customers, right? And of course, the customers is the most important, right? Now, I spent a lot of time traveling across the region before the pandemic. Even during the pandemic, I still talk to a lot of partners, a lot of customers in the region. So one of the common feedback I get from the audience is that, look, I have not touched Cloud ACI before. I have no experience. I'm not confident to talk about it, right? Then I asked, why have you not touched Cloud ACI before? Well, because in order for me to start to use anything AWS and so forth, these are the cloud people in my company. I'm not a cloud people as a result. I do not have the access, right? As a result, I never tried Cloud ACI. So the idea of this session is to give you the first hands-on experience, right? You touch, right? And during this training session, we are going to give you the free access to one AWS account and one Azure. Okay, only for today, okay, not for the rest, only for today, for you to experience how to use Cloud ACI in the public cloud, right? And that's really what we're going to do, right? So we're going to talk about it, right? I want you to go and touch it, to know how it used, and see how it makes sense to your person, right? So that's really the goal. By all means, I do not intend to have this session very complicated. It's supposed to be very easy, right? To pick all the basic skills so that we can find new opportunities, basically. Okay, so that's really where the design of this workshop is about, right? So as Derek mentioned, this is going to be a very tight schedule because there's quite a lot of things that we want to cover in this session, right? A big majority is going to be hands-on. There's not going to be much of PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint, you can look at our Cisco Live. There's a lot of content. There's no point for me to repeat. I was just coming from the point of imparting my personal skills, my experience, as I engage across different customers. I should share this with you so that you can replicate what we're doing here. Right? That's really what we intend to do. Okay, so that's pretty much the first point I want to talk about. Okay, so Let's look into what many of the customers we are talking to, they have in their IT plan. Right? So by now you should know that everything changed, right? The amount of IT services that we consume is much more than what we were doing before the pandemic, right? So today, I guess we order food online, right? A lot more frequent, right? Before I enter a shopping mall, I must scan my phone, right? All these are digital services that's in place around us, right? So as a result, it drives a lot of pressure for many customers to rethink how they go about, rebuilding their entire IT landscape. And of course, coming into all this discussion, you will see people talking about rehosting. Okay, let me migrate, right, move from point A to point B. Right? So normally this is where we talk about increasing the server capacity and so forth. Right? But this is not really a big difference, right? I mean, it's just hardware purchases, right? Then of course, the replacement option, right, whereby instead of maintaining the system myself, putting everything on-prem, I will start to use maybe things like software as a service, right? So things like all the public email services, these are those things that people will be doing, right? Or even things like database services, right? I do not want to maintain database. I do not want to apply patches. I want to use database services offered by Azure. I want to use certain services, maybe Dynamo services offered by AWS and so forth. So these are the trends that's happening. And of course, there's also another case where we talk about replatforming, whereby fundamentally the architecture of the application remains the same, but we move away certain functions. Right? So maybe I move the database to somewhere else. So these are some of the common discussions that we come across. And of course, you also have things like refactoring, whereby we migrate everything. Right? We actually go about changing the entire application from the traditional virtual machine into a fully integrated environment with microservices, all this. So these are the different type of conditions that we have, right? So I think the point of view, of course, is today everything that we talk about is going to be multi-cloud, right? It's not going to be a case where you talk to our customers, hey, I just want to implement an on-prem data center. Not likely the case, right? So your customers will probably come in different forms, right? So I may have on-prem data centers. I need to think about how to move to the public cloud, how to consume public cloud resources. Now the dynamics also change. So when we first started talking about all the public cloud a few years ago, one of the main drivers that the call was really about can I save cost when I go to the public cloud? Because I don't want to buy hardware, I want to go on a pay per use. But it ended up after a few years, this saving cost itself, reducing the OPEX wasn't the case. In fact, a lot of customers we work with end up spending a lot more saving money. So that was a problem that we faced, right? That also, and another reason why people go to the cloud is always about, I want to get things done faster. I want to deploy a virtual machine faster, right? Versus, talking to my IT department, it's so slow. Right? So that's why we talk about, a lot of automation and so forth. So people think that when I go to the cloud, I have automation. In fact, this is not true. Right? When you go to the cloud, yes, you can create an instance on the fly, no problem. But when you go about defining the security policies, how to connect from point A to point B, all these are not automated. You will do it yourself manually. Right? So these are those things that sometimes maybe as we jump into the bandwagon, we overlook many things. Right? But I hope this session we can go into some of these topics that help you to really look about things. Right? Do I believe the right thing or not? Have I been following the wrong thing? Right? I think this is really where we can go for further this discussion. Right? So in the multi-cloud environment, automation itself is important. In fact, automation itself is not a new thing. 5-10 years ago, we talked about automation already. But today, the automation is going to a lot bigger magnitude. Right? So for instance, today, the class that we're attending, all the AWS stuff, all the Azure stuff, you're touching them, all this orchestrator, all these are fully automated, right? So we actually write script to do things. Now you might be surprised that in a lot of the products that we talk about today, it was built ground zero for automation. So what I mean is this: if you look into, let's say, ACI, which is one of the things that I take care. Everything that I do on the ACI, whether it is on-prem ACI, whether it is the cloud ACI, or whether it is multi-cloud orchestrator, every UI touch that I do can be done through an API call. That's what we mean of automation, right? And likewise, we go into our inter-site solution. how we interact with the UCS, how we do all the monitoring, everything. Right? Everything is through API. It is through automation. Right? So it is not a case where in the past I know OSPF, I know BGP, I'm good. Today not enough, right? OSPF, all these routing fundamentals are important, but more important to upskill ourselves is look into how you can program stuff, how you can use Ansible, right? And this, in fact, are one of the very high value conversations that we have with many customers. So again, this is something that you might not think about. Right? Programmability itself is one of the important things, right? So another problem we also face today, I talked to one of the customers. I was really thinking, if I were to do your function, I will lose all my hair. Why? Because this is one of the big banks in the region, right? Very aggressive in adopting new stuff, right? So they have stuff like some Kubernetes clusters deployed in AWS, some OpenShift deployed on-prem, right? They have some KVM stacks, some VMware stack, and so forth, right? And they have different kind of networking solutions, right? So one question I ask them is, you have this full multi-service which is running in your system, right? How many touch points do you have? Just to understand how one transaction works, right, is a conference call with 10, 20 people to understand how this exactly works, right? Now, this is not the way you want it to be, right? You don't want to have so many touch points, so many places to interact just to get a simple thing done, or so many people to ask just to understand how the flow move from point A to point B. Now, on conversation, it is very easy, but I can tell you that a lot of the customers that you talk to, very likely you have these kind of challenges. How do you define a single policy? How many touch points do you have? Right? And of course, this also translates to, can you visualize, right, how these two endpoints interact with each other? I have some endpoints that sit in AWS. I have some endpoints that sit on the Azure. Because of the data sovereignty issue, right, as we work with many countries like Indonesia, Thailand, and so forth, right, customer data cannot move out of the country. Now think of this. If I'm in this condition whereby I'm controlled by this data sovereignty issue, right, my customer data cannot leave the country. If I want to use AWS, I want to use Google Cloud, what is going to happen? I can move everything, right? And the closest Google Cloud or Azure Cloud or AWS Cloud they can find in our region is based in Singapore. So if you're a customer, in Indonesia, in Thailand, and so forth, right? How do you do that? Right? You can move everything except the sensitive data because this is against the law, right? So that becomes a problem, right? So how do you have all this visibility, right, on where all the endpoints, all these different services being split across, and to make the matter work, your service can be a SQL service sitting on the data centers. Your service could be an application service in the form of virtual machine, in the form of a Java services. Your services itself can also be a container service running on, Kubernetes, OpenShift, and again. We're talking about different form factor in the form of physical machine, virtual machine, also in the form of container services. Another dimension to make it worse is that my services could be on-prem, could be in the public cloud. So how do you really, map out, create a map on who is talking to who? Think about it, right? This is going to give you a lot of headache, right? If I'm running this operation, 3 months later I have no hair, all the hair gone because it's too complicated, right? So another problem is also about how do I go about ensuring consistent policies. I have 10, 20 touch points. I have some touch point in AWS, something in Azure, something in on-prem. This is about networking and security policies. How about container services? So this is going to be a lot more challenges. How do I define a consistent policy such that service A can talk to service B in this kind of mix of environment, right? So this itself is worth to think about, and the more you think about it, the more you can see that the value that we can bring to your customers. Many product solution in the market today talk about multi-cloud solution, okay, but how can you have a single pane of glass to visualize your policies? Right? How can you have consistent policies to be expand across all these multi-cloud? This itself is a very important requirement for many customer operation, and this is where we can really offer the solution to the customers, right? And also, as you go into all this multi-cloud environment, right, there's always a learning curve, right? So One of the conversation I have with some of the partners I work with very often, what this guy told me about my age. They say, wow, today everything go cloud. I only know networking. Okay, so how can I be relevant? In fact, in today's environment, as everything moves to the multi-cloud environment, networking itself is becoming a lot more important than what it used to be. Because everything that we talk to are interconnected, right? So you got to know about, I mean, you still can't run away from stuff like, how DNS work, how do I plan IP addresses, right? So even though we talk about cloud, okay, don't assume that when you go to the cloud, you don't need to think about IP addresses. You're wrong, right? IP addresses is still an important thing to factor. You need to plan your IP addresses to be allocated for, when you go to the AWS, for instance, I want to build a VPC, I want to build a AZ zone. All these require address planning. You cannot just randomly say that 10.1.0 belongs to this. You're going to run into trouble. You need to plan. Okay. How do I interconnect all the different clouds together? Right. So this is where we talk about, how you go about building all the IP segments. Right? Do I use the hub and spoke model or what else, or fully mesh, right? And segmentation itself is another important policy, right? We talk about segmentation, right? We talk about micro segmentation functionality. Now, how do you extend this, right, from on-prem to the multi-cloud? Or in some cases, I could have no on-prem, everything in cloud, right? I have no on-prem data centers, right? So how can I implement segmentation policies, right? Of course, other stuff like HA itself is unavoidable. Then we also talk about all the stuff like all the VPN, BGP, all this will come into part of the a new conversation that we engage as we go into the multi-cloud environment, right? Now, just to dive a little bit further, the point that networking is important, is in fact very important, and I'm not saying that it is easy. Important, I mean it's easy. Again, if I see from the point of a customer operation, so if I want to go about implementing a hybrid cloud solution for my customers, right? If I take out the operation, how do I connect stuff? What kind of knowledge do I need? Okay, so this is just one view of a communication. If I have some data center which is running NSOS or any other kind of switching platform that you have, right? I have one data center that's running, ACI, software-defined networking, right? I have one resources, one of my project, QA development, whatever, right, is deployed in AWS. I have some community service deployed in Azure. I have something else deployed in Google. Now, if you look into this chart alone, okay, how many things must you learn? Quite a handful of things, right? You need to know about, how do you define a region in AWS? How do you define in Google Cloud, right? How do you define a VRF? How do you define a security policies? How do you define filters? All this, right? How do you define VXLAN relationship and all this, right? How do you do VPN? So if you put all this together, easily this can be a lot of knowledge that you need to pick up, right? So just to give you an idea that when you move to the networking itself, right, in the multi-cloud environment, it is not going to be easy. It's going to be a lot more complicated because every cloud provider will give you different type of cloud native services, right? If I want to do load balancing, right, I want to do a L4 to 7 services. L4 and 7 services in AWS is drastically different from L4 and 7 services offered by Azure, and also even offered by Google Cloud. Totally different. How do you do it, right? So these are the problems, right? So I think in the lab session today, you're going to interact even simple things like creating an instance in AWS can be very different from creating an instance in Azure, right? So the function of an IT operation team is going to be a lot more complicated, right? So how can we make things better? I think that the point is, I'm not saying that this is a problem. Good luck to you, right? This is a problem. This is a context. Okay. How can we create value to our customer, right? How can we have thought of a solution, okay? So I hope by now, we don't have any contention that the network is not important. I want to say that the network is very important, okay? Right? So I can't talk about it today, earlier. In today's environment, your resources are deployed in different locations, right? It can be it can be a case where there's no physical data center. It is possible, right? And that's why we talk about cloud first environment. So if that's some of the project we're working with, no data centers, it's all cloud and remote branches, right? I could have resources deployed in Azure in AWS, whatever you want to talk about. I also have resources deployed in some of the hosting environment, right? This is one dimension, as I mentioned, right? Then the other dimension is that my workload come in different forms. They come in the form of a virtual machine, come in the form of no physical machine, come in the form of physical server, come in the form of number of services, whereby I don't have an IP address. Okay. So regardless of all these different platforms, different form factor of the services, we need a way, right, to provision the services. I don't care. I don't care whether you're AWS or Azure. I want one way to provision the network connectivity policies, right? I need one way to visualize how these services in a fully distributed manner is interconnected to each other. And I also need one way, right, to define a consistent segmentation policies across. And that is what we're going to walk through you on how we can do this. Okay. So ACI itself is not new to many of you, I hope. It has been around since the 2014. It's the first SDN solution in the market that has been to the market. And in fact, today this has been the most prevalent solution deployed in many mission-critical environments. Okay. So when we first started with ACI, we talked about single data center, right? Then we extend to multiple data centers. We talk about multi-port, we talk about multi-site, and of course, in the last 1 or 2 years, we extend all the way to the public cloud. So that's really what ACI is doing, right? So what I like about ACI, I mean, personally, is that once you understand the ACI basic construct, we talk about all the endpoint group, we talk about all the contracts. It is the same whether I do on-prem, whether I do multiple data centers, or whether I go to the cloud. Right? And whatever I learn, right, is applicable. Right? Things are not wasted. Right? So this translates to a very good skill retention for many of the customer operation environment as well. Okay. So today we're going to jump a lot more further into cloud ACI. So cloud ACI itself, it is a virtual form factor. It is not a physical thing. It is something that you can deploy on the fly, which we'll do this in the lab today. Okay. We will translate the policies. Right. So when we talk about policies in ACI, we're talking about two things. Right. First is endpoint group. Endpoint group is about how we classify entities. Right? Are you HR machine? Are you database? Are you whatever? How we classify stuff. And we talk about creating contract, which is a series of permit deny statements. Or you can talk about from point A to point B, I want to do layer 4 to 7 function network balancing, firewall inspection, or stuff like this, right? So one thing about cloud APIC is that compared to the APIC, physical APIC that we're familiar with, right? APIC translate your intention into policies, into configuration on the switch, physical switch. Cloud APIC do the same thing, but it translates to the respective cloud native services that you can be using. Right? So for instance, I want to deploy an EPG, right? It may translate into certain things like security tools, right, in AWS or in Azure or in Google, right? And everything that we talk about here is all policy driven. Right? So a cloud APIC itself can be deployed to manage multiple regions. Right? So we are going to talk about this in further detail. Right? So what is the benefit of cloud APIC today? Right? So for many customers that we interact with, right, it is about creating a universal policy model. This is my intention. This is how the database, right, talk to the application. Right? This is how I want it to be load balanced for instance. Right? So I need to define one time, and this can be applied to Google Cloud, can be applied to Azure, can be applied to AWS. Right? That's what we do. Right? Now, as I mentioned earlier, even though you start using AWS, right, the only part that automates for you is to create an instance. How to connect, how to define security policies, all these are still manual. Right? So through the cloud APIC, we can automate all these managing policies, right? And that's what we do. Right? And also in our solution, we are not working on any agent to do any enforcement. Right? So there's no agent installed. Right? So that is what benefit of cloud ACI. So I'll just go through some of the important that we talk about here. Right? So one of the common misunderstanding or wrong perception about cloud APIC is that cloud APIC requires can you mute everybody else? I'm saying that. Thank you. Okay. So one of the myths I want to undo here is that cloud APIC can be deployed without any on-prem data center. Okay, I repeat again. Cloud APIC can be deployed with no on-prem data center. So I don't need to have an existing ACI, right, to start using cloud APIC. Not necessary. So in fact, in the lab today, all your hands-on activities do not require any on-prem data center, right? It's going to be all, the instances we deploy in the cloud, okay? So that's one of the important things that you want to, register that. Okay, so in the lab, we will go through this again. Okay, so these are some of the cloud APIC use case that we can bring upon to the customers, right? So of course, we can automate all the connectivities. So later on, we're going to experience how we interconnect resources in Azure to AWS. Okay, how we do all the VPN connection, how we do all the BGP automatically. So in fact, you don't need to know anything about BGP. You don't need to know about VXLAN. All this, everything is fully automated, right? Then we will look into things like how we do the segmentation policies, right? How to define contract, which service do I allow, not allow, and this is where things that you're familiar with in the APIC, right, can be applied in the cloud APIC. Nothing changed. Okay. The other services used today, which we don't have time to cover today, will be things like how we use the L4 to 7 services in the cloud, right? And of course, along the way, we'll talk about how we provide all these visibilities from the operational perspective. Okay, so this is really just a very quick overview, right? So, how we put this in real life, right? We talk about all these things like all this value, complexity, how to put in real life. So, we're going to go through one customer example. Right? So, I won't share the name. Right, so this is what it looks like. Again, I changed the application to something else, something more relaxed rather than being serious. Okay, so this is going to be an application that you're going to deploy in the cloud. Okay, so for this application, there is a front end. There is also a database. Okay, so the front end is things like this that you see here. Let me get the pen. Right. So this is the front end that we have. Okay, this front end is deployed in AWS. This front end is deployed in Azure. Okay, and what this application do? This application allow you to sign in, right? Create a profile for yourself. Right. So this is a real profile you create for yourself. You key your email ID, you key your password, and so forth. Okay. Then your sign profile will be stored onto the database. Okay, so that I remember who you are, right? And why do I remember you? Because why do I need to remember you? Because later on, you can use this application to upload some picture. Okay, you can upload a photo of your favorite cat, your favorite dog, whatever you want. You can take upload a photo. Okay, this photo being uploaded, right? It will be copied onto AWS S3 bucket. Right, so nothing is stored here. There's nothing here. Right, this is just the interaction endpoint. Right, so this can come in the form of a microservices. I can put it on the container service Kubernetes, or I can just put it as a normal virtual machine. To make my life easy to prepare the lab, this is just going to be one single VM that I deploy in AWS. Okay. Now I have some design problem, right? In this case, if everybody uploads a picture and the picture is the same name, then you get overwritten as you go to the S3 bucket. Right. As a result, this application itself is going to create a randomized UID for every picture that you update, so that it won't be overwritten. Okay. Then comes the problem. You upload the picture, and there's a randomized UID to refer to this file that you uploaded as S3. This information again is stored in the database. So the database essentially stores two kind of things about you, your user ID, your password, about pictures. Right, about it is not the picture, right? It is the meta information about the pictures, right? Where is it stored and the corresponding UID. Okay, so after that you can view the picture. Right? So this is a very simple application that I have written just for this lab, right? Just to give you a feel of how the real application looks like. Okay, so these are the external components that we have, right? And of course, you can also connect data to an AWS instance that do exactly the same thing. So whatever picture I upload in AWS, I can review through the AWS or vice versa. Okay, so this itself is a resemblance of many applications that we work with, many customers environments. Very common, right? Again, they can come in different form, right? My database can be a virtual machine. My database can be a MySQL, can be a SQL service offered by Azure Native Services. My database can be Dynamo service on AWS, right? So again, this is just a logical function. Okay, so this is how the application looks like. Okay, next we will talk about what happened. Now, if I'm in customers, how the thing looks like, right? So first of all, application will be deployed on the development environment. Right? So for instance, I may want to engage somebody, right? Maybe an integrator, right? Or some developers company to build me a sample application in AWS first, right? You do whatever you want, I don't care. Show me the prototype, show me how it works, right? Show me how, you know, the actual user workflow, okay? That's a dev environment. So there's no real data, you can build fake data, simulated data, doesn't matter. Show me how it works. So everything is deployed in AWS. Okay, so this is during development, okay? Assuming that we pass the development, oh, okay, yeah, I like your function, move on. I want to test the skill. I want my services to be offered in AWS. I want my services to be offered in Google Cloud. I want my services to be offered in Azure. How do I do that? Okay, using the same model, what I do now is we're going to change, right? So pretty much this is what we do in the development thing. We're still using the fake database. I know the real one. Then I will put a new front end in Azure, so that now I can interact to the AWS front end, I can interact with the Azure front end. At the same time, I still have the same services that I intend to do. Right? So this is doing QA. I want to do the load testing, you know, make sure that my services is readily available in AWS and in Azure. Okay, then of course the next thing I want to do is production stage. Now assume that this is very sensitive information, right? This database, wow, very important one. I cannot put it on the cloud. Then the government will come after me, right? I need data sovereignty. So this is the final stage whereby we are not going to do a demo. There's no demo. I'll just show you how it looks like. Sorry, there's no hands-on. This is where I'll show you a demo, whereby after I finish the dev stage, I will now use the real database on the on-prem data center. Okay, this database initially that I built here is decommissioned. I'm going to use this one, right? So this is just to reflect a typical customer use case. So it can be a case of replatforming, it can be a case of refactoring the entire application. Right? So this is a scenario we'll walk through today. So as I mentioned, there won't be much of PowerPoint. Any kind of presentation that we talk is about how you build this. Okay, so this is going to be very hands-on. Okay, very hands-on, right? So the way you look is for the rest of the day, what I intend to do is to cover the basic concept, right? Again, this is not going to make you expert in AWS networking. It's going to make you an expert in Azure networking. No. It's only enough for you to understand the challenge and how far it can come in, right? You can use this as a baseline to do further research, to train yourself further. Okay, but just give it enough information, right? So that you can build a solution. You can show this to your customers how it works, right? And this is also provided with very detailed instruction on how you achieve this objective. So I may not go through all of them, but in your PDF files, it can be in the form of an implementation guide if you like to. Okay, so I will explain some basic concepts. Okay, we explain the steps. I will show you a live system how we configure it. Okay, everything I learned, it took me 3 times to learn. Right, so this is the first time, the basic concept. I show you how I do in a live system. Third time, you do it yourself. Okay, this is where we give you the actual AWS account as well to do stuff. Okay, so this is the game plan. So as far as possible, try to stay on course. Right, don't stay away for too long. Right, you might miss, because if you miss one step, the rest you have problems. Okay, that's what we do. Right. So this is the schedule. We are slightly off. Now what is the time? 10:36. We are off by 30 minutes. So I hope we can catch up the time. Okay. So after this, I will talk about Cloud Epic at AWS. Then we're going to spend some time in the lab. Right. We are going to deploy Cloud Epic in AWS. We are going to deploy the simple application that I talked about just now in AWS. Okay, we'll do some tests. We're going to have a short lunch, right? Probably half an hour to make up the time that we lost. Okay. After we come back from lunch, I hope we can start to talk about multi-site orchestrator. Right? So again, this is not going to be all the PowerPoint. It just give you enough concept what is MSO, what it means, what it can do for you. Okay. Right. Now along the way, we'll talk about some of the differentiators that we can offer during the lab as well. Right? So again, when you touch, I can explain. Now I talk to you, no you cannot visualize. Right? So I think later when you do the lab, I will explain right where things are different. Okay. We're going to use multi-site orchestrator, right, to define policies across the AWS, across the Azure after lunch. Okay. So then we're going to deploy another instance of Azure in AWS, probably in Azure. Then we start to do everything in the single pane of glass. So that's going to be pretty much the afternoon. So in the morning we talk about Cloud Epic in AWS. Afternoon we talk about MSO and Azure. And of course, the last part we talk about some of the new capabilities that's coming up. Right, is in the next 3 to 6 months or even further. Right, so that's really the plan that we have for today. Okay, so that's what I have prepared for this first topic. Okay, any question at this stage? I think we should end around 6 o'clock.
That is 6 o'clock Singapore time, so for Vietnam it should be 5.
Yeah. The time I give here is Singapore time. Okay, let's talk about AWS. Okay, I will be focusing on my screen, so if anything you see in the chat room, then my colleague will raise a question on your behalf or something, right? So let's talk about AWS. Okay, so in AWS, there are a few important things to understand, right? So first of all, is the structure, right? What I mentioned here come from the point of a networking construct, right? So there are many other things in AWS. So I'm just talking about the structure from the point of networking. Okay. So in the AWS, things are organized in terms of region. So if you look across the world, you're able to see region like, for instance, Southeast 1 Singapore. You'll see Southeast 2. You'll see US West, Europe, and so forth, right? Region are normally applied to a big geographical region, and within the region, you will see things like having a availability zone, right? So AZ typically refers to a physical data center. Right? So in one region, you may have multiple AZ, right? So this is how AWS offers HA services to the customer. Okay. Now, when you go deeper to the networking, in the AWS world, there's this thing that we call the virtual private cloud. It's called the VPC. Right? VPC normally refer to a finite region. Right? So for instance, if I have deployed resources in Singapore, then I will need to have at least one VPC. A VPC typically relate, a VPC is relate to a CIDR address. Right? So here, a VPC, I may map it to a /16 IP address range, right? So by default, when you sign up for AWS, right, you will see one VPC. You will see a VPC with at least 2 or 3 CIDR range being assigned. So normally these are the 172.31. Okay. From each of the VPC, I define a CIDR address, a /16. This is CIDR address, and from here, I can create smaller subnet, and each of these subnet is now associated to an AZ. Right? So for example, I got a VPC, I got 10.0.0.16. I can create 10.0.1.0.24, 10.0.2.0.24, and so on. Each of them I can allocate to a single AZ. Okay. In the AWS networking construct, a single subnet lives within the range of an AZ. You cannot have a subnet that go across the AZ. This is not allowed. Okay. Now, one of the different thing about AWS versus our traditional routing is this. In our normal switching world, right? When I say a route table is applied to everybody, right? Of course, I can also do things like I create a VRF, and from the VRF, I create route tables, right? In AWS, the route table that you see here is applicable against a subnet. Okay, so I may have the same destination in the route table, right? But when I apply to a different subnet, I can change the destination. So for example, for subnet A, I can say that in order for you to go to 1.0, you'll use gateway 1. If I apply to subnet 2, I can say that in order for you to go to subnet A, the same subnet, you will use gateway B. Right? So these are those things that you can implement in AWS. So in a way, it looks like policy-based routing, right, in what we do in our normal switching routing. Okay. Now, how do you define access policies in AWS? Right. So there's two types of ACL that we talk about. Right. First of all, you can talk about things like network ACL. Network ACL is applied on a per subnet basis. Right. So if I implement a subnet in AWS, apply to AZ, I can implement a network ACL. So this will apply to everybody else that belong to this subnet that I created. And there's another type of ACL, it's called the SG, or we call this a security group ACL. Okay, this is applied at the per instance level. So if I create an instance called database, I can implement the SG ACL into into this particular instance, and this is host specific, to be this way, right? And SG ACL or network ACL itself is a series of permit deny statements that you see in this example here. I will say this source, this destination was a TCP and was a UDP that allowed to pass through, right? So this diagram here is just a very simple illustration on how AWS represents network to the customer. Now, come to the question of how do we connect resources in AWS to the outside world? Okay, by default, there is a IGW, or it's called the Internet Gateway, that's been created, right? In a normal environment, traffic from outside coming in is not allowed other than SSH or ping. This is the default configuration. Sorry, only SSH, ping is not allowed, right? So this is a default policy defined ACL, right? And also by default, anything that's going out is okay, and this is going through the Internet Gateway. AWS instances created, you can choose, right, whether you want to have this address exposed or not exposed. So in this case, do you want to keep this in private address? So in the event that this instance you create do not have a public address, right, it is private address only, right? Everything is going out is going through some kind of net function, right? In the event that you want these instances to be accessible by outside world, then in the AWS, it will allocate a public address to this instance, and this address can be accessible by the outside world. So in the lab session today, we are going to experience both conditions whereby address can be private, address can be public. Okay. So in order for the instance to be accessed by the outside world, there is a net function that's going through. It will translate your public address into the cited address that you allocated here. And of course, the third function that we have here is the VPN gateway. This may be needed if I want to connect to the on-prem data center, right? And this may be needed if I want to connect from AWS site A to maybe Azure site A, for instance. Right? So these are the different type of networking element in the AWS world. Okay, so when you look into the, this is just a repetition of what I just mentioned in slide number 1, right? So in AWS, we talk about having a region, we talk about having a VPC, we talk about having a subnet, we talk about having an AZ, right? And these are the corresponding mapping onto the ACI world. Now, one thing you have to pay attention to is that, especially when you look into building DI as a service, disaster recovery, for instance, right? Take note that minimum address space for the AWS subnet is a /18, right? So you are constrained in the event that you want to migrate a subnet from your on-prem data center onto the AWS, or you want to do some kind of host migration, right? The minimum address space is /28, right? You cannot use /22, okay? So I also mentioned about SG group, right? SG group itself is applied against the instance that you deploy. So if I go to AWS, I create the virtual machine, I create an instance, right? I use SG ACL, right? SG group to associate this, and within the SG group, there's a list of inbound, outbound policies. Right? So this is a list of permit deny statements. Okay, so if you're familiar with all the firewall policies, permit deny, then this should be easy, right? In ACI, we actually translate all the contracts, right, apply to the EPG into all these rules. And of course, with network ACL, and last is the route table, right? So route table itself, remember, it behaves like a route PBR. Right? So in AWS, do not be surprised to see that to go to the same destination, right? Why my next hop is different? Right? Just because every subnet that you create, you can have a unique route table. Okay. In terms of external connectivity in AWS, right? So first we have the IGW, right, which allow all the communication to go to the outside world. Then we can also turn on the NAT function or the PAT function, right? So port address translation can be used in the event where I do not expect any kind of inbound or outbound. NAT can be used in the event that I want the internal instance to expose to the outside world, right? And of course, the third option that we talk about, the last option we talk about here, is the direct connect. So this is a case where I may have a customer, right, that may have a dedicated list line to a point of presence AWS, right? So this is the direct connect, right? So in the direct connect, this is as well as having a list line. It's also possible to run the VPN on top of the direct connect in this example. So these are some of the typical use case on how we connect stuff. Okay. Now in AWS routing, don't be surprised. All right, it's actually very significant. Okay, so let's talk about how things work in AWS. Right, in terms of routing. Okay, now in AWS, first we talk about having a VPC. Right, a VPC itself is tied to a region. So let's say if I deploy something in Singapore, something in Australia, whatever. Right, every region that I create must have a VPC, and the VPC itself is tied to a CIDR address. Right, so these are all based on RFC 1918 private address ring. Okay, so also mentioned earlier, every single subnet itself can have a unique route table. By default, every subnet that you create, right, within the same VPC, they are routable. Right, so if I define, in this case, in this illustration, I have Ninja 01, I have Ninja 02. By default, as long as you belong to the same VPC, you can interconnect with each other, no problem. However, in some customer environment, I may have multiple VPC from the perspective of I have one AWS subscription, I deploy something already, and my colleague also deploy another AWS subscription and also deploy something, some services, and they want this to be integrated with each other. So in this condition, we call this a VPC pairing. Okay, VPC pairing is not about dynamic routing. There's no dynamic routing. You don't exchange route. Not possible. Okay. So in VPC pairing, in the event that I want to talk from point A to point B between the two AWS accounts, one of them have to request a VPC pairing. Right? So you need to generate a VPC pairing in AWS, and this will send to the destination, and the administrator must manually approve, right, to accept the invitation, right? So once this, you have built up the relationship to say that in principle, I allow pairing from VPC 1 to VPC 2. This is only the first step. Okay. The next thing to do is that in VPC pairing, even though I accept the invitation, I do not do any form of routing to you. There's no routing. There's no route exchange. So you need to define static routing to say that in order for me to go to VPC 2, how do I go there? Okay. I need to know about what are the destination subnet, right, or destination CIDR in VPC 2. I put it into my forwarding table. And the other thing I also do here is that in order for this to work, I must turn on the security policies. Right? I cannot be say everything can pass through. I need to define a specific permit deny against the UDP, against the TCP, against the ICMP if I allow them to happen. Now, so as you look into this diagram, I can be creating a VPC pairing from VPC 1 to VPC 2, VPC 2 to VPC 3, going through all the manual effort. However, communication from VPC 3 to VPC 1 is not supported. We cannot do this, right? So as a result, VPC relationship not transitive, right? You need to define a fully meshed configuration. So if you start to have multiple VPC, like go beyond 3, 4, 5, and more, then this itself can be a logistic nightmare to take care. Right? So this is one of the problems that a typical cloud experience will run into, right? So sometimes my customers don't survive while do all these things. Yes, even though we talk about automation, all these are not automated, right? So one of the things that people do, instead of defining the full meshing, right, between all the VPC, is to have the idea of building a transit VPC, right? Now, we call it a transit VPC, right? In fact, a transit VPC is no different from any other VPC, right? Just that in terms of function, I make it like a gateway, a transit point, right? So this is where instead of having A talking to B, talking to C, I can now having A talk to transit VPC, right? And likewise, I can manually configure. In order for me to reach B, I go to this guy. In order for me to go to C, I go to this guy. And likewise, I do the same for B, from C as well. So this kind of build a kind of a routing function, right? I think the point of view across here is there's no dynamic routing. Any kind of packet forwarding in the VPC have to be defined statically, right? You have to do static routing, right? So again, if you are familiar with all the, I mean, you spend a lot of time in routing, I don't think you like static routing. It's not something scalable, right? And it's also not something that can adapt to changes in the network environment. Now, from the transit VPC, in the event I want to connect to the on-prem data center, yes, I can connect on-prem. Whether this can be a DGW connection or it can be a VPN, doesn't matter, right? So these are one of the typical solutions that people use to connect multiple VPC onto the on-prem data center. So I could have, project A, project B, project C, need to talk to the database, I deploy the on-prem data center. So this is one approach. Okay. Now, this has been around for quite some time, and this could be the way that your customers is using the AWS networking. Right? Extremely painful, extremely manual. Okay. Now, the next function that was introduced in AWS about 2 years ago is what we call the transit gateway function. Right. So a transit gateway function itself, this is a specific instance that you can deploy in AWS. Right. So the way it works is that if I want to turn on TGW, right, I need to deploy a TGW. The next thing I need to do is I need to say that I will offer sharing of my TGW to this tenant A, to this tenant B. Manually, I will export my service. And for this tenant, if I want to use the TGW, I'm going to consume this TGW service. I will say that, okay, I will put my subnet to use this relationship, right? Now, why is TGW better than the transit VPC approach? First thing is that in TGW, it allows a much higher performance versus the VPC concept that we talked about just now. We have 50 per second versus 2.5, right? And also in TGW, I can do a TX peering, or I can do a TGW peering with another region. Maybe I deploy somewhere in Southeast Asia, I deploy somewhere in Australia in this case. Then to simplify all the forwarding, I can interconnect all the TGW, and my static routing configuration across all the VPC becomes a lot easier. Right? So that's one of the benefits of using TGW. In the lab today, we are going to use the TGW, right, to interconnect different VPCs that we may have deployed, to interconnect resources in AWS to Azure, also to connect the resources from AWS onto the on-prem data center. That will happen in my demo. Okay. So that's the TGW. Right? So if you look at the TGW, some of the important components here. There's an attachment. So when I share service to you, TGW, right, you need to attach the TGW service I offer to you into your subnet, right? And for every TGW, there is a route table, right, to talk about forwarding, which I explained later, and this is associated to a specific subnet. TGW provides the route propagation capabilities as well. Okay, so this is how the TGW looks like in terms of the forwarding table. So what I have here is that assume that I have two VPCs to make my life easier. We use two VPC for illustration, right? So first of all, in the TGW, there is a routing table to say that yes, I know about 10/16, I know about 20/16, and how do I go there? 10/16, I will use the VPC attachment one, which is this guy, and then 20.0/16, I use the VPC attachment 2, which is this guy. So from the TGW, I know how to go to 10/16, I know how to go to 20/16, but how would the VPC know about how do I come to here? Well, for this guy, I say that I don't care, as long as 20.0, I will forward to the TGW. So this is one way. Then of course, if I have an on-prem data center somewhere here, on-prem, I have another AWS, I have another Azure, then I will start to clear all the entries, right? These entries are going to be manual, right? These are all manual entries to sell the VPC, route table in VPC1, right? In order to go for the foreign destination, you use TTW, right? So all these are static entries that you need to add. Okay, so these are some of the automation that we can take care as we talk about ACI later. Okay, so in terms of connection, right? The most common one used by many customers is to use a VPN site-to-site connection, right? So when you deploy a VPN function, right, in AWS, you can actually download the corresponding configuration, right? How do you define your CPE IPsec policies? This can be downloaded in the form of a template. You can apply the template onto your on-prem data center, right? So this is one way, which we are going to use some of the IPsec connection, but instead of using the AWS VPN, we're going to use our CSR, right? The reason is that we need more than VPN. We need to be running things like Ospf. We need to be running things like EVPN data, right, to extend all the hosts across the hypercloud environment. Okay. The other option is the direct connection, right? So from AWS, I can have a dedicated connection to the on-prem data center, right? So normally this connection can be clear, unencrypted. If you choose to, you can have a dedicated, you can have a VPN connection on top of VPN, right? And of course, from here you can have a very fast access to some of the native AWS services, right? Now, one thing I want to highlight here is that as you move to the cloud, you need, all right, to be able, let me get the pen. You need to be able to consume all these services, right? If you can't consume all these services, then you kind of defeat the purpose of moving to the cloud. Some of the solutions in the market today, even they say that they can extend to the cloud. So what they do is they put a hypervisor in AWS, right? You put a VM on this hypervisor in AWS, and you want this guy to access the S3 service. How would it work? You think about it. Right? I put a hypervisor in AWS. So as a result, I extend my data center to AWS. Okay. So I create a VM in AWS on this hypervisor, and I want this guy to access S3 services. How would this function? Very likely, you're going to go back all the way to your on-prem data center and go with the egress interface on the on-prem data center. So this is not the way to go. It's too painful, right? So you need a better way. We should actually show you how this is being done in ACI. Okay. So the rest are some references. So I don't need to go through. You can refer to this at the registration how we come and start. Okay. So let's go into the cloud API. Okay. So this is not new. In fact, this is one of the slides I commonly use when I explain ACI to customers. So since 2014, we have this deployed. So one of the important things about ACI is endpoint group. Endpoint group is about entities that belong to the same type of security domain. Endpoint group, right? So endpoint group can come in different forms. We'll talk about it later, right? Of course, in endpoint group, then we talk about contract. Right? A contract itself can be very simple L3 or 4 filtering. A contract itself can be QoS setting. Right? I want to set to whichever DHCP code. No problem. I a contract. A contract itself can also be tied to a services like a load balancer or firewall and so forth. So this concept, since we introduced until now, is still the same. There's no difference. Okay, how you classify and what is permitted between these different classifications. Okay, but what that is changing over time is that we added more way of classifying things. Right, we have virtual machines. We added virtual machine. We added physical machine. We added container services. We also added in all the public cloud resources. Right, as the endpoint group. Right, so in the later part of the day, we'll talk about how we extend endpoint group, right, to cover some of the native AWS services or Aws services, right? So if you look into the cloud API, what does the cloud API looks like? Okay, in the cloud API, right? So when you go to AWS, you actually go to the marketplace, you order a cloud API, right? So this is the first thing you'll see is that you have a cloud API, right? After you you provision, you deploy the cloud API. Right, we will define some of the basic configuration. This is where we deploy the CSR. Right, a CSR is used to provide interconnectivities, right, between all the different VPCs, between all the different sites that we may have. Okay. Now, one thing that's important to know is that in ACI, we talk about multi-tenant. Right. So when you first turn on ACI, you're going to see an infra tenant, you're going to see a management tenant, you're going to see the common tenant. Right. So in likewise, when you deploy the cloud API, you are going to see an infra tenant minimum, right? The infra tenant is meant to provision the network, right, to support the interconnectivities, right, of cloud API and all the different CSR that you can deploy, right? So in short, we call this the infra VPC. Right? So this is used by the infra tenant. So on top of deploying TGW data, all these are part of the infra tenant. Okay. Then in the multi-tenant environment, I can deploy one tenant for marketing, one tenant for sales, one tenant for whatever, right? These are called the user tenants, right? In a true multi-tenant, like what we call about ACI, okay, every tenant itself has a unique control plane, has a unique data plane, right? So every tenant, I have multiple VRF, right? In every VRF, I have multiple subnet, the unique routing table, right? And for every tenant, I can define a unique role-based access control. You belong to this tenant, you can do the following, okay? Now, this itself is a very unique differentiator that ACI is providing, and this also extends all the way to the public cloud, okay? Some of the solution in the market think that multi-tenant is about VRF. This is not true. VRF is part of the multi-tenant, but it is not multi-tenant. Because VRF do not create a perfect data plane and a controlling condition. It does not provide anything like local access control. So I cannot associate entities right that belong to this tenant as we do in ACI. So VRF itself is not sufficient. Right? You do need a much more comprehensive approach of defining multi-tenant. Okay. So in AWS, whenever you start, at minimum, okay, you need to have 2 AWS subscriptions. Because in the AWS Cloud API implementation, a lot of them is guided by how AWS implements control, right? The infra tenant itself will be using 1 AWS subscription, okay? The user tenant itself will be using a different, right? A different AWS subscription, right? So these are different, right? So in your lab exercise, we are going to have two. We're going to have two subscriptions. So I think by now you should receive 2 emails already. One email is for the infra tenant. One email is for the user tenant. Right? So you will be using these 2 accounts, right, to access the AWS resources. Right? So that's what we're going to do. Okay. Okay. I will pause here. Any questions before we jump to the lab? Any question at this stage?
Yeah, question. We have 2 empty spots. I think 2 partners didn't join this morning.
Okay.
So we can give the slots to, because there are 2 other additional partners who join in. So I think we can assign to them, right?
You can just assign your call.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, because there are a few of the partners who didn't join with the email. So if you think you can persist until 6 p.m. today and stay with us and do the labs, right? Do drop me a ping. We have 2 slots if in case you have not received the email, so you can also participate in the lab as well. Just drop me in a ping in the chat or in the WebEx space. Okay, we try to allocate to the first 2 partner SC. Right? Yep. Question. Sorry, please continue.
You decide. I'm okay. Okay. So as I mentioned, it's going to be heavy lab. So now it's going to be all the lab exercise. Okay. So this is lab exercise starting soon. Derek, you can use my script to add them or something. Right? If not, I can add them manually.
I don't have the AWS one yet, but I think we can do it. AWS is fast.
Let me finish one first, then I will jump to the stuff if it's not okay. So this is what we're going to do in our lab exercise. Okay. So for the morning part, I hope we can at least finish the AWS stuff. Okay. So this is the morning exercise. We're going to do this in the morning. Okay. So before lunch, you should be able to deploy the portal with the Cloud API in AWS. You should be able to create the users under the portal and you should do the portal. Okay. So this is how it looks like for the first part of the morning. Okay, we are going to deploy the entire cloud epic in AWS. We deploy the sample application, right? So we'll come back to this again, right? So from the front end, we are going to use TCP port 3000, right? So outside will come in using 3000, right? So normally when you talk to your stakeholders, right, your application owners, right, this is probably the furthest they can tell you. What IP address? I don't know. Right, whatever, I don't know. I just know that outside come in 3000. Okay. This guy talk to the database. It's a MySQL service. This is using 3306. Okay. Then this guy will store all the persistent data, and at the same time, this guy is going to talk to the S3. Right. So that is normally the furthest feature you can get from the application guy. How do you translate this to AWS? How do you translate this to Azure? This is a headache, right? So don't worry, we'll talk about all this. Okay. So this is the first part. This is after lunch. Okay. This is a demo. We'll do it again. Okay. Now, for my personal practice, normally I don't configure things immediately. I want to know what I'm doing. I want to plan the address. Okay. So we will come back to this picture a few times. Okay. So first we're going to at the end of the day, you're going to see 3 sites interconnected to each other, and there will be IPsec tunnel built among them. Right. So we build a full mesh connection between the on-prem to AWS, also to the Azure. Once the IPsec tunnel is up between the CSR router that we deploy in AWS, we will build an Ospf Area relationship with the on-prem data centers, right? And the spine in our on-prem data centers also build an Ospf Area relationship with this particular VPN router. Right? The whole idea is that to allow the spine to talk to this guy here, right? Because this is important, because once this connection is up, this is where the BGP EVPN is going to run. Okay, so this is how the network topology looks like. Between all the sites, there will be a fully meshed IPsec tunnel implemented. Now, don't be scared. You are not going to configure IPsec tunnel. All these are fully automated for you. You are not going to configure anything. It's fully automated for you, right? After this is done, Ospf neighborhood will form. Will form a full routing relationship between the spine. I mean, for my setup, the spine for you don't have. It will be a full Ospf relationship between the spine and the CSR, and you see all the full routing between the spine and all the AWS instances. Okay. Now, there are some important planning that you must think about it. Okay. So when we go about implementing the cloud epic, right, in this exercise also in the subsequent customer environment, right, there are some important IP address you must pay attention to. First of all, every site has a unique ID. Every site there is a unique ID. Okay, and they cannot be the same. Okay, so for your lab, pay attention. I think you, I believe in your email, it actually talk about which port you assign to. Right? So in this case, if your port number 01, for instance, then your site ID is 101. Okay, there is an infra-CIDR address, right? The infra-CIDR address is applied to the infra VPC in AWS, and this is used by the cloud epic. It is used by the CSR, is used by all the different things that provisioned by ACI. Right? So there's a CIDR address to you, right? So you'll see this in the CIDR overlay. And you're going to see an external CIDR address, right? What is external CIDR? When we build all the IPsec tunnels, right? So if you look at this tunnel, right, between Azure and AWS, right? How do I build IPsec tunnel? I need tunnel address. This tunnel address comes from where? I cannot just, use this address. Cannot. This CIDR address is from here, right? From the external CIDR addressment. Okay. So every single tunnel built by the CSR device data is going to use the this external CIDR range. Okay. Then you're going to see another address is called the tenant address. The tenant CIDR address is referring to the actual virtual machine that I deploy here for testing. Right. So I deploy a database, I deploy an application front end. It is going to use the tenant address space. Now, in this exercise, you only have one tenant. But if you go into a POC with your customers or in the actual deployment, there will be multiple tenants. Right? And because of that, you need to plan for multiple CIDR. So this one can be n number of them, not one. This is n number of them. Okay. Okay. Then the last thing you have is the BGP information. right? In our solution, how do we propagate the routes across? Now think of this, in the AWS, in Azure, they don't give you any dynamic routing, right? So the only way we can do is to use BGP to exchange the route information, to exchange the retrievable information between all the different public cloud at the on-prem data center. So this is where we need to run BGP from point A to point B, between public cloud and public cloud B, and on top we run BGP EVPN. All these require a BGP number. In AWS, we need to allocate a TGW with a BGP number. Remember, when we talk about TGW just now, right? For all the different VPC, you say that if I want to go to this destination, I go to this TGW. Okay. How would the TGW know about this destination? It cannot know magically, right? This is where the BGP comes in. Right? So we use TGW. We talk with TGW with BGP to exchange information so that this can be propagated into routing tables to allow all the different VPCs to talk to each other. Right? The CSR will require also with the TGW. Right? So this is for the AWS. You'll notice that it looks exactly the same for the Microsoft Azure. Same, no difference, it's the same. Okay. The highlight here is that in AWS, we'll come to that shortly anyway. I mean, after lunch we'll talk about it. Right? So you notice in the AWS infra, I only have one sider, right? In Azure, I have two siders, right? This is the default used by ACI or the CSR AWS and AWS. This is one more sider. It's a user space IP address. Will be things like in the event I create a load balancers, I create a firewall, I create a service node, it will come from this address pool. Right? So this is the slight difference between AWS and Azure. Okay. So this picture is important. Copy it somewhere. Right? If you can print it out, stick somewhere on the wall, we'll come back to this diagram a few times. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about some logistics before you can start. Okay, getting started with cloud basics. Okay, by now you should receive 2 emails. So how does the email look like? Let me call this one. So this is one. You can see my email screen now. I just randomly brought one. Okay, so you should receive an email that looks like this. So this one is for the Microsoft Word. Email for them. Okay, let me plot one. Okay, so for the morning, you are going to receive you should have email like this. So for instance, you will say that you should have 2 emails received. Right? Let me just plot this side by side. It should look like this. So there should be 1 email for the infra tenant. Right? The first part of the lab, you are going to use the infra tenant, right? And you're going to have another email for the user tenant. Right, so this is infra, this is user. Right, so in my lab documentation, I will highlight this information. Okay, this is your landing page to AWS. You can double click this. This will bring you to the AWS page. Right, then you'll key in this is your user ID and this is the password. Okay, this is only valid for today. After the class ends, this is not usable anymore. It will be automatically deleted. Okay, this is the user account. I also attach a SSH private key in the event that you use SSH to any instance. Most likely you're not going to use unless you are doing some troubleshooting. Okay, so this is what you have. Now, in the event that you need to refer to, let's say after this, right, some documentation in the web, right? This is the one that can go through the walkthrough of how to deploy stuff. Right? So anyhow, in my lab guide, I also cover some of the details here. Right? So in total, you should receive 3 emails. 2 emails for the AWS, right? 1 for the infra, 1 for the user tenant. You need these 2 in the morning. Okay. The infra is slightly different from the tenant, user tenant. Then you should also have 1 from the Microsoft, right, which has been sent to you. This will be needed after lunch. Okay. So this is all about logistics. Anyone don't receive the AWS, you can put onto the wire space. We try to figure out something. I think Gary mentioned 2, right? Because we do some sort last minute. Okay. Now, this is the steps involved in deploying the entire cloud APIC solution right? It is not that difficult. It's quite easy. It's quite easy. Okay, so we're going to do this in the morning. In fact, in the next 10 minutes or so, right? We are going to order cloud APIC from the AWS marketplace. Right? You will set up the cloud APIC. Deploy the cloud APIC. It takes about 10-15 minutes. Right? So once you get it deployed, you can get a coffee. That's why in the morning there's no break. Right? Just while waiting, you get a coffee. I will take a coffee too. Okay. Once the cloud APIC is defined, we have to define the region management policy. So this is where we configure the infra Vpc. Right? We say, okay, how many CSR I need, what are the external subnet policies and so forth. Right? Right. So these are those things that will define in the region management. So this should be very fast. Maybe half an hour or so should be enough. Okay. So after we finish deploying the cloud APIC, okay, we're going to create a tenant. All right, you're going to create a VRF. You're going to create a context profile, which I will talk about it later. Right. So you don't know about it. Okay. So let me explain what else you will see in the lab. What's the lab? Okay. So we will post the PDF file shortly for you to run the lab. So this is what you are going to build in the next hour, right? You will build the front end in AWS and so forth. I think I talked about this earlier, right? So what are we going to do in order to go through this step? Right? So you're going to build the infra Vpc, right? Define all these. I talked about this earlier. We will do all the BGP, right? Then we'll do a tenant. So this is part A. This is part B. Right? So we try to finish this before lunch. Okay? Okay. So the rest of the session, you are going to see things like checklist. Okay, now there's two ways of doing things. One way is I give you a PDF document, right? Then it's quite difficult for me to refer you to the PowerPoint and PDF. So instead of doing this, I give you a PowerPoint with very detailed steps. So there's no PDF. Okay, of course, I hope we have more time to improve further. Okay, so this checklist is done for you in the lab already. Okay, but why do I put it here? So that in the event that you want to implement the cloud APIC for your customers, whether it is a POC or an actual deployment, this is how I will do things. Before I engage and implement for our customers, I will have this checklist in front first before I move to the next step. Okay. So other than just teaching you how to deploy cloud, I also share with you some of the best practices in deploying the solution so that you can take this, you can use after this training. That's my goal. Okay. So before you go, start. First of all, you must be able to access the infra account. Okay. Now, because this is a lab run, by us, and also because this costs us money, as a result, I'm not able to give you the full administrator access. Right. So I give you enough privilege to do the lab purpose. But in real life, you should have an administrator access. Right. You must make life easier. Okay. Of course, there are ways that you can, turn down the administration and so forth, right? But this will take you some time. So as far as a POC is concerned with your customers, best is to ask for administrator access. Right? But in the lab, I can't because of constraint that we have in our costing, budgeting, and so forth, right? Okay. You must have idea where do you want to deploy your resources, right? I just can't tell you, oh, deploy in AWS, but AWS has so many regions, right? So for our lab exercise, the region is going to be AP Southeast 1. This is going to be Singapore, right? Then you also need to plan, right? What is the IP address for your cloud APIC infra, okay? So this belongs to a different tenant. It belongs to a different space, right? So we just need to make sure that as I go about deploying cloud APIC across different regions, I want to make sure that all these are unique by itself, so that later when I deploy the cloud API in AWS in Azure, they don't crash. That's all I want, right? Even your user address crash is okay, it doesn't matter, right? But of course, in practice, we try not to do that, okay? You must be able to access the AWS infra console. If you can't access the console, nothing you can do. Okay, there's nothing you can do. You must have access. You must have the account. You must be able to access. Okay, so this will be the checklist before I even start the POC. Right, so it's more like a real production exercise that we're doing now. Okay, these are some of the tasks that is needed, right, when you go about provisioning cloud APIC in AWS. Right, so this is going to be repetitive. Every exercise I give you, you are going to see checklist and the task. Okay, now not everybody is familiar with AWS. Right? Sometimes people take some time to know all these things. So I don't think we have enough time for you to explore AWS. We rather that you have some time more focused on the cloud API side of things. Okay. As a result, some of the function is taken away in the lab exercise. So you'll see something that I put here. For instance, when you deploy cloud API in AWS, right, you must create accessory key. If not, it's not going to work. Okay. You must subscribe to the cloud API CSR 1000 in the marketplace. Okay. Otherwise, you cannot deploy. Right. Then you can deploy. You must record you must have the password, the IP address. You verify that this is working successfully. Right. You will see that there's a sign here with a tick. Tick means in real life you must do, but in the lab you don't do. Okay. So tick means this. Tick means if you see a tick sign, there will be steps that will tell you. So in the event that after this, right, the Saturday, Sunday, you're going to implement AWS for your customer, right? Then you need to do this, right? So that's why I mentioned here. This step is done for you. It's for your reference. So in the event you deploy your own solution later for your customers, this is what you need to do. This is how you create a key pack. Okay? This is why it's important, right? Because if you do all this, you cannot finish, right? So it's a Friday, so let's not stay too late. Okay, that's how to finish on time. Okay, so tick means it's done for you already. Okay, then you need to create accessory key, right? Normally, after you create key, you're supposed to save your private key, right? So in fact, what I do for this lab is not the right thing to do. In real life, you don't send your private key around. Okay, you don't. Now why I send to you? Because once you create a private key in AWS, you cannot download again. You can only download the private key at the point of creation. Right? This is all security, right? After you create a private key, you must save the private key. Once you get a screen, you can never retrieve back the private key already. That means your key is useless. Okay? Right? So this part is important. You always save your key somewhere. Okay? In the event you lost your key, the key is useless. Okay? You cannot download anymore. Okay? It can be very bad if I deploy some instance with the key, and I lost the key. That means forever you cannot access the instance. Right? I come across customer with this kind of problem. Too bad, there's nothing you can do. Okay? You need to recreate the instance with your private key again. Right? So that's not. I mean, in practice, pay attention. I mean, do be careful with the key. Okay? So for this exercise to make life easy, I have downloaded the key. Again, all these are done through automation scripting. I download the key and this key is sent to you by email. Right? In real life, don't do this. I will only do this for lab exercise. Okay. Okay. So what we do also here, remember I also mentioned to you, right? You are not going to come here. This is done for you. So you need to subscribe for CSR and you also need to subscribe for the API. Okay. Now, what CSR to subscribe depends on the cloud API version. Okay, so we do recommend a specific version. So every time we release a new cloud API, there is a corresponding recommendation for the CSR 101B. Moving forward, there is a likelihood that instead of using CSR 101B, we may be using the Catalyst 8000 for this function to have a better performance. So that may be happening soon. Okay, so again, you see this line, right? This step is done for you for reference you can do. Okay, now also. I also want to talk about this one, right? You see at the bottom, there is a small little box that AWS infra account only. Now, if this is the first time you come into this kind of AWS and cloud API, right? It's very easy to confuse. I got two accounts, one infra, one user, which one to use, right? Always check your instructions. Here, I'm talking about infra account. Okay? Later on, you will see that when you go to the time you want to use the user tenant account, I will put another sign here to say that this is for user tenant account and this is in a different color. Just to make sure that we don't get people confused. Okay. So I understand first time you use one can be overwhelming one, the two account which one to use, right? And all these are so difficult to understand. There's a 12-digit number in AWS account. Right? I cannot understand it. Right? So that's why I put the documentation here for you to follow. Okay. So this is all provided for you. The rest I'm not going to go through too much. Right? Okay, so that is what we have. So Derek, I will start the walkthrough on how we deploy stuff. Assume the rest. Yeah. Okay, so this is the only time you deploy the Cloud API in AWS. After lunch, we also need to deploy the Cloud API in Azure, but that part is not needed. I automate for you, so there's already a Cloud API in Azure deployed for you. Because it's exactly the same thing, no difference. Right? The only thing is you talk to Azure or to AWS. Right? Okay, so let me just quickly show you how this is being done. Okay, so in case you can access your AWS already, you can follow me. Anyhow, I'm going to allocate some time for you to do this. Okay, I will highly recommend, because you're going to open different pages, right? You're going to open 2 different AWS accounts over and over again, right? So I would recommend to use, if you're using Safari, right? For my case, I would like to use the private window, right? So that I can have multiple sessions. I will not kick each other session out, right? So if if you're using Safari, you can use the private. If you're using the Chrome, I think there's a console or something like that, right? I think on IE also there's something similar, okay? So first thing I do is I need to have access to the AWS account, right? So as in the email that you have, oh, so I used the wrong window. Okay, I need to tilt my head again because the screen is here. Okay, so as in your email, you should see something like this, right? So this is the infra account, so you need to look for this one, infra account, right? You should see traffic, infra dash something something, right? You should see CAPIC dash infra dash something something something, okay? So this account, CAPIC tenant, we will use data, don't touch, right? This is a site server, okay? So let me log in. Then okay, I'm logging in. Okay. So this is your infra account, log in, right? Password has been given to you. Right, log in. So we're going to deploy. Let me make the screen smaller so you can see. Okay, so let me make it smaller. I think it's quite hard to see because my screen is running at a high resolution. Give me a second. Let me make it too small. Cannot be too small because it's quite difficult to use. Okay. Okay, hold on. Move it. Let me change the screen that's comfortable for you to see for a second. Let me try 1080. Okay, 1080. Okay, so this is the AWS account that you have. Okay, so once you can log in, please put your hand in your team space, right? Okay, so once you're ready, go in, you can do so. Okay, I believe Derek just sent the PowerPoint to you also, right? The PDF file is there.
Yeah, the PDF is inside the WebEx space, so please go there to download. Right, if you don't have the link to the WebEx space, please message me as well.
Okay, so this is your console when you log in. Okay, of course I'm admin. You will be your user ID somewhere else. Okay, so first thing is make sure you are in Singapore. Okay, must be Singapore. If you deploy other place, it's not going to work because your permission do not allow you to deploy anything there. Okay, even if you can deploy later, you cannot patch because nothing works in outside Singapore, right? A lot of them is because of how I set up the AWS policy for you. Okay, so make sure you are in AP Southeast Singapore. Okay, if you make a mistake, if you don't choose Singapore, you choose something else. Later the rollback can take about half an hour or so. Let's not go to that area. Let's avoid that. So what we'll do, right? So a few things that we're going to do now, as to the left, right, is that Okay, so let me talk about the subscription, right? So what you need to do, this one is done for you. You don't have to do it's done for you. So what you can do is you can go to the marketplace, okay, to verify that you have the subscription enabled, right? So you should have the CSR 1000B URL for maximum performance, and so the Cloud Epic report, right? So to do this, you select marketplace, you bring it to this page. So this is more of validation, right? Again, you don't have to do this. It is in the documentation. It's more for your reference, okay? So I'm going to deploy the Cloud Epic, right? So you come to the same page, you select marketplace, right? You should see this Cloud Epic in front of you. What you do is you click on this guy, okay? So most of the time it's going to be just follow through the UI, right? So in this case, I'm okay with this, right? I will say I will launch the cloud formation stack, okay? Right, so you are now in the launch cloud formation stack, right? You don't change. You use the latest version. Please select not the latest 512G, right? 5.2 we have not added in. So please make sure you select 512G. Don't use 5.2. Okay. 5.2 will start to introduce next week. Right? But this week, because we are kind of in the transition between 5.1 and 5.2, your lab guide is based on 5.1.2. Right? Please make sure you use 5.1.2G. Okay. For your region, you select Singapore. Okay. So far, all following. I need indication because this is not a physical. I cannot see you. You can see me only. It's not fair. If you're okay, please indicate on the team space that you can follow.
Or you can put a smiley on the list as well.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. So Gordon is smiling.
Any smileys?
Yeah, Gordon is smiling.
Okay, very good. I see DZ, I see Nasri responding. Outstanding. Good. I need you to do it this way because I would like to do physical, right? Now I cannot see you. So the only one I can see you is a thumbs up. Next time you buy me coffee too. No problem. I'll buy you coffee. Okay, so make sure software version is 5.1.2. I don't take 5.2. 5.2 I'm not putting documentation yet. Okay. For the region, select Singapore, and once done, you select continue to launch. Okay. Okay, so this is all AWS. So the next step is most of the time you will just select launch. Right? Most of them are default configuration is always launch. Okay. So again, this will tell you about clear stack and so forth. You can look at the stack, you can view, but do not make any changes, right? Unless you know what you're doing. Right? So for recommendation, is just take a default. It's more than enough for you to follow the stack. You just use whatever that come across to you, default, implement, and go. Okay. The next thing you have is you're going to specify the stack details. So this part you must pay attention, be careful. In my PowerPoint slide, if you look into the PowerPoint slide that we have downloaded, right, there are some details provided here. Right, so this one you have to pay attention because if you make a mistake here, you need to roll back, and this can take some time. Let's not go into that condition because we don't have enough cycles. Okay, so when you go into here, one thing I want you to pay attention to is this. Okay, first you must create a name for your stack. You can call it any name you want, doesn't matter. Right, you can call it any name you want. Okay. Then you have to let me take the pen out. Okay, you can call any name you want. Right, you need to define the infra VPC pool. Right, so this VPC pool is based on this range. Right, 10.3.1xx.0/24. Okay, this address cannot be changed. After you deploy, the only way to change is to delete and recomplete deploy. Okay, that's why I say this will take you 30 minutes if you make a mistake. Right? So make sure you use the right address range. Okay, what we're going to do is to make sure that this address is not the same as the other. Right, right. So that is to be just to make sure that's okay. Right. So try to follow this naming convention. So even though you make a mistake here, you don't define the address here. It is okay, but in real life, please make sure that this is not the case. Please make sure that you have a proper design that I'm going to show you. You implement as it is. Okay. The easy to implement, you can select AP Southeast 1A. Okay. Password for the AP. This is the password for the AP controller. Okay. You have to make sure you write down and remember the password. Right? In the event you forget the password, later you are going to have a problem. You cannot log into the AP. Right? So please don't enter this condition. Right? So please make sure you key in the right password. Right? So password normally requires 14 characters, including tag and special characters. So this is one example. C exclamation SPO code. This is one example. Again, you don't have to use. Okay. Then you are supposed to select the SSH key. Okay. So in a normal implementation, if let's say you are doing it by yourself, you're supposed to create a key in AWS, then you use the key. But for your lab exercise, the key has been pre-provisioned for you already. Right? So if you pull down here, it will just show you the key, and the key comes in the form of CAP-info-SSH. Right? Then you select default. Okay. So this is what you are going to see. Right. So I'm going to use the address. In this case, I'm port 0. So I should be 10.3.100. Okay. So I will call it the trainer port. But I will not deploy because I already deployed this already. So I will select AP size 1A. Okay. Instant type don't change. Use the default. Right. So in this case, I will clean a password 12345 C exclamation S 12345. Okay, then I will define the key. You notice these are the key that's pre-provisioned. For your setup, please use CAP-info-00 or 0102 depending on your point number. Okay, then the last part is the access control. Access control is saying from where you can access this cloud APIC instance that you are going to deploy. From where? And so for the lab setup, we'll say 0.0.0.0.0. Now, is this a good idea? No. In real life, you don't turn on 0/0, right? Because in real life, most likely I'm going to have a NOC center deployed in the operation, right? And this is the area that I expect them to talk to the cloud APIC, right? Or maybe a certain DevOps station or MSO somewhere. And this is where we define the specific address range to allow this to pass through. Okay? So that's what you are going to do. For real life, but for the lab, we say 0/0 because I don't know where you are. Right? Then the next thing to do is you can just go all the way down. The rest is just accept and deploy. Right? So this is going to show you the configuration one time. Make sure it's correct. Please spend some time. Make sure it's done correctly. If not, you can go back. Right? You can go back. Okay? It will show you that the validation step is okay and you can implement. Okay? So for all of you, you can go ahead and implement. You have to select and acknowledge, and then you select create stack, and this will get the cloud APIC deploying. Okay, that is all we need to implement the cloud APIC solution. Okay, very fast, right? It should be very easy. Okay, the entire deployment can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, you can take about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, so what you can do, the next step that you need to do is to get the IP address of your APIC deployment, right? So what you can do is you can, after you deploy, you will go to the AWS, it will actually bring you to the AWS CloudFormation page. You'll bring you there, right? So you don't have to do what I do. So what you're going to see after you click implement, you will go into the CloudFormation. Right, so after you select deploy, it will bring you to this page, right? It will show you deployment in progress, hourglass that's running, and so forth. So the next question is, how do I get the cloud APIC IP address? So there's two ways. One way is you wait for the stream to come out, you select the output. Upon successful deployment, you are going to see this address, 54.151.162.197 in my example, right? Your example can be different, will be different, not can be. Okay. So I will cut and paste this IP address, and this is going to be my cloud APIC address. So you will come into here. Okay, so if you see this page coming, then you would get your cloud APIC working already. Okay, so this is one way to look at the IP address. After you select a launch, you go to the cloud formation. Right, you can go to the. You'll see that the status here will show. It will show the running. You can see my screen, right? My screen share or not?
Yeah, okay, you can see.
Okay, because I don't see the share logo. Okay, you come here. This one way. Now, in the event that you click too fast, you lost. You miss the page, right? You can always come here, cloud formation, select your stack. Another way to do is you can go to EC2 services. You can select services. That's EC2. You can select EC2. Right, you will see instant running. Select instant running. You will see all these instances are being created on the side. In the first part exercise, you will only expect to see this guy only. You only expect to see a CAPIC one being deployed. You will not see CSR. CSR only happens much later, right? Right. After this, we go to the CSR part. So right now, you should expect a cloud APIC to be deployed. The state will start from initialization, running, or until running. Then you can go down. You select the cloud APIC instance. You can see this IP address. This is the same IP address that I showed you just now. You can take this address and open a page with the cloud APIC. Okay. So this will take you for the next 10 to 15 minutes. Now, to make sure that you are following, after you have the cloud APIC, what you do is you take a screen capture of this. Okay. You take a screen capture of this, and you post onto the Teamspace like what I do now. Okay. And what we'll do is we will try to get you some surprise gift at the end of the session. Okay. So we do need you to post all these things consistently so that we know you're following. Okay, like what I do now, I just post the screen. Okay, one of the questions being asked by Yuan Lu is about you see the permission error, right? This one is okay, right? Don't worry about this. Right? Let me just bring up this. This question. Oh, let me make it too small. Okay, let me use this one. Okay, in the event you see this is okay, right? You do not need to look at the permission. You just select launch, right? You just select launch, right? Don't worry about this permission thing. It's okay. It's not a problem. Because as I mentioned earlier, I cannot give you the full administrative right. So that's why you see this, but this is not going to impact the cloud. You can go ahead. Okay, let's see whether there's any question.
Yeah, I think the partners can start doing the lab already, right?
Yeah, you can do as I walk through, right?
So I think I also message you in a Teams space, right? Two partners who have just joined. Will you have to provision their account so they can also start?
Okay, you all can start. Let me provision it. Let me see how I can do it. Let me see what I can do. Okay, let me try. Okay, I will stop my sharing. I need to do some provisioning. Okay, give me a few minutes. I will get the two new user IDs. Derek, which port do I assign them?
12 and 15.
Hold on now, wait. 12 and wait. So Wallace, I will put on to 12. Confirm 12 because it's going to pick out the existing 12.
Yeah, I just want to confirm 12 Muyoto Wibowo, you're not in the class, right? As well as Derek Lee from Taiwan. Yeah, I think it should be good.
Okay, Muyoto will be taken out from 12. Okay, and then I will put Tukanian into 15. So there's this Derek from ID Tech Tonight, Taiwan on.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, our position now. Okay, top shelf on the way. Wallace on the way. Give the email solution in the next 2 minutes. I will have 15. Okay, that was an error. You see the site can't be reached. Don't worry, because after cloud APIC deployed successfully, it will take some time for it to be ready. Wait for a few minutes. So now is a good time to get a copy. After we click deploy, just get a copy. A few minutes, it will come back. Okay, so I'm going to get shelf running. Okay, port 15 now. I'm sending out to Japan. Okay, so the Azure one is out. So I'm going to position the next one. Azure. Azure. Shelf. Shelf. Okay, so Wallace, you should have an email by now. I think has been forwarded for port number 12. You should also receive one from the Azure. Okay, so everything is sent. Then, yep. Okay,
yeah, I think for partners who have deployed the APIC, they can go for lunch, right? We can come back.
No lunch. Later.
Okay.
Don't.
Okay, I thought you break for lunch during this point.
No. We want to get the cloud APIC out first. I think we target lunch at 12:30, right?
Okay.
Or later. Because the time tag after lunch is MSO, so we need to get the PowerPoint. Okay, so let's wait for the first few cloud APIC windows to come out, then I'll proceed to the next topic. Okay. So for the last group of audience, port 12 and 15, your port has been allocated. Wallace, can you respond whether you received the email? And you come in. Okay, we got one cloud APIC deployed. That's good. Let's wait for a few more before we move on to the next one. Okay, in case you're ready, you can start to follow the guide, right, to explain, to deploy stuff. I will start the explanation in just a few minutes time. Okay, so again, I just want to, there was this error that come out for some of the audience. In fact, most of you will see the error, but that is not a problem. Please ignore the mistake. Please ignore this error. Okay, in the event you see this error, okay, this one is okay. Don't worry. You can just proceed to deploy. Okay, I think this is the second time I repeat. This is not a problem. right? Because this one I do not give you the full admin right. Okay, you can just proceed and click on Cloud APIC deployment. Okay, don't worry about permission. It's okay. You cannot find the PDF. Peng Lam, I think the PDF file has been sent out already. It's right at the top.
Yeah, I just sent it to. I just sent it again to Kingdom. You can download the lab slide.
Okay, I want any more ready with the Cloud API in front of you. Then I can move on to the next. I just wait for one more, then we can talk about the rest. Anyhow, you can do it in lunch. Right, so let me proceed to the next topic. Okay, after you have deployed the Cloud API successfully, right, you should be able to log in using your password, right? So once you log in, we are going to define one time only. This is for the infra tenant configuration that we need to do. Okay. So again, as a practice, normally I would suggest that you put a checklist, right? So before you proceed this step, make sure you have the AS number for your BGP router, right? So remember just now I talked about this triangle diagram, right? This picture is important, right? Keep it somewhere because your BGP number is here, right? Always refer to this number. Okay, so keep this page side by side, very useful. Okay, this is the design. Okay, so you're going to use the BGP numbers for CSR and TGW, right? Why is that so? Because CSR and TGW will use the BGP to exchange route information, right? You need to create an external subnet, right? So this is you for all the IC stack panels used by the CSR. Right? In fact, these two are referred to the same subnet. Okay. In the event that you need to connect to the on-prem data center, right, you will need the on-prem VPN address. So for your lab exercise, don't have to. It's not necessary. And for my setup, yes, I will need to do that because at the end of the day, I will connect to it. For your setup, you don't have to do so. Okay. You need to define the OSPF area. Okay. This OSPF area has to be the same number with the Azure, with the on-prem data center. Otherwise, the OSPF neighbor relationship cannot be established. Right? So for my setup, I use everything as 10. Okay. So these are the checklists that you must have. So you must have the design in place before you configure. Otherwise, you can be in trouble. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to configure the region configuration. This is going to be Southeast Asia 1. Okay. We will verify the CSI is running. We will verify the TGW is operational. So these are those things that we will verify. Okay. So as you log into the Cloud API, right, this is what's going to happen. Okay. So this is your Cloud API running. So what you do is you log in using the administrative password. Okay. What happened is because this one is already up and running for some time, I already have this configured already. So this is what you're going to see when you first log in. Right. You're going to see the default welcome wizard. You'll go to the admin. It will bring you to a passage called the region management. I think in my PowerPoint slide, what I showed you is this, right? So when you first log into the ACI, you will select the begin first time setup, right? Then the next thing you will have is it will ask you to do the region management. So this is the thing that you must do, right? Otherwise, the entire API will not up, right? You must select this, otherwise it is not functional. Okay. So once you're inside, right, first thing is you will make sure that we turn on the enable TGW. Right, because everything that we use today is going to be TGW. Right, this one is already enabled for you. You see that AP Singapore, Southeast Asia 1 deploy. Right, you have to check CSR. Right, you have to check intersect. Right, because when you connect to the Azure later, right, it's going to be intersect, and this requires CSR. Right, so just make sure that all these are checked. Then you can select the next. Right, don't select stage, select next. Okay, and this is the part that you're going to configure all the intersect configuration. Okay, for this one, please do not delete. right? Don't change. This one, keep it as it is. Now, if you remember just now when you deploy the cloud API, right, there's one part it will ask you to configure the infra Vpc IP subnet, right? It is automatically uploaded to here. So this one, don't change, don't touch. Okay. You will need to add a hub network. So in this case, I'll add a hub network. In this, I will call it infra. I'll keep the BGP number that I have. Okay. Now, one thing about I would be doing this because I define already. So I will just call it trainer, right? I can key a number. Let's say 65522. Okay. 6512. I just key any number. I will not implement. I will not apply. Anything you key, you must select the checkbox. If not, your change will not be accepted. You must select the checkbox, then you move on to the next one. So this checkbox is important. You must select. Okay. So I will not do it. Right. Then you key in the CSR number. This number is based on the triangle diagram that I showed you just now. Again, refer back to this picture that I showed you here. Right. So this is what I mean of always having a design in place before you implement anything. Right. So everything that I configure here is based on this window that you see here, based on this configuration that I'm referring to. So this is your configuration that we care about. Okay. So we define the APIC. Now, in terms of recommendation, I would suggest you to use APIC admin or something else. Don't use admin. Right? Just later when you go to Aws, admin will be rejected. Right, because of some of the policies in Aws, right? So we will do something else. So what I would like to do normally is to make sure I use the same ID across all my CSR. Right? I don't want to say that Aws is this and AWS is a different one, right? So to make my life easier, I just use CAPIC-admin. Okay. Don't worry about license token. You don't have to key in because we are using for lab exercise. You know, no license token normally means 30 days later CSR will be big. Right? So anyhow, for the lab we need 1 day. Okay. So you finish that. Next, you're going to configure the interconnectivity, right? I mentioned about having the IMP multi-protocol VPN configuration required, right? So this is where if I have an on-prem data center, I will key in the IP address of my on-prem data center VPN termination point. Okay, for your setup, you don't have to, not needed. Right? This is only for my demo setup. Okay. Then you define the Ospf area. Right? So for my setup, I use 10 because my on-prem data center is using 10. So I will want to make sure that all the AWS, all the Aws uses 10. Okay. Then I will define the external subnet. So this subnet is going to be used by the CSR to do all the IPsec tunnel. Right? Once this is done, you select save and close. So that's pretty much finish the configuration for the infra VPC, right? And of course, after you deploy, after a few while, a few minutes, you should see the deployment of CSR is successful, right? You should see the IPsec tunnel coming out. You will see the OSPF configuration coming out. Okay. BGP at this stage you won't be seeing anything. Right? This will happen after during the lunchtime or after the lunchtime. Okay. So that is what we have. Okay. So this is a very basic configuration. So next, I'm going to move on a little bit faster so that we can jump to the lab. Okay. As well. Let me talk about another topic. Okay. So as long as you have your first APIC running, post a picture, important. Okay, so assume that you have deployed the cloud APIC already. This is when we first start to build information about the tenant. Right, so I'm going to build a tenant to run the application. Right, so as I mentioned earlier, for every implementation, you need to have one subscription for infra. You need another subscription for the user tenant. Okay, so that's how we do things in AWS. When you go to the Microsoft Azure, it will be different. Right, this is for AWS. Okay, now next comes a very important concept that we have not talked about it in our on-prem ACI implementation. Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, in the public cloud, right, we talk about creating a region, right? So I have a region AP Southeast 1A, right? Then I define a cyber address of whatever address to be used by the tenant, right? So we need a way to interrelate that this region and this CIDR and this VRF are binded together. So I need a way to define a relationship between the region, a CIDR address, and the specific VRF. Because when we go for all the BGP EVPN, we are all talking about routing, VPN, VRF, and so forth. So I need a way to connect a relation between a region assigned to a VRF and assigned to the CIDR. Okay. Now, in terms of relationship, I can have one region mapped to multiple VPC. Right. So let me erase this one. Let me. In terms of policy construct, I can go by having one region, okay, to multiple VPC. I can create multiple VPC in the region, right? So every VPC that I create, right, must be associated to a CIDR address. Right, so I can have Singapore region, Southeast 1A. I can have 5 regions, but every region must have a CIDR address, right? And every of this is bind to a VRF. And this is where we describe the duration. This is done through the cloud context, right? So before we start, we have the cloud ASIC deployed, and we're going to implement the first user time. Okay, so this is the cloud context that we will go into the lab session later. So this is one of the steps that we'll do. Okay. Okay. So as we move on to the tenant description, right? The first thing we want to do is we have to define the endpoint groups. So again, this is just a concept. Later in the hands-on that I'll go through how to do all this thing again. So first thing is the endpoint group, right? Endpoint group itself is about how we classify stuff, right? How we classify it. So in endpoint group, there's 2 endpoint groups that we talk about here. First is the cloud EPG. Cloud EPG refers to any instance that I deploy in AWS as a cloud EPG. So I deploy a database, I deploy an application instance, right? These are cloud EPG, and this is again is tied to a VRF. Okay. Then another one is called a cloud external EPG. Right? So these are anything that's outside the AWS. So for instance, later on when I want to connect from my desktop to the application there, I'm considered as a cloud external EPG, because in ACI, the relationship is always about EPG to EPG. Right? So how do I represent someone outside AWS? So this is called the cloud external EPG. Now, as you enter into the Microsoft Azure data, you will see a new EPG is called the service, a cloud multi-service EPG. Right? So this is referred to all the SQL service that's offered by Microsoft, or the Kubernetes service offered by Microsoft. So we go to that short. Okay. Okay. So how do we classify EPG? Right, so if you are familiar with the way we do in VM, right, I create an EPG in ACI. This EPG was transferred to a pod group in the vCenter, and I will bind the virtual machine onto the pod group. Right, so by doing so, this VM belongs to this EPG. In the public cloud, I don't have this pod group concept. There's no such thing. Right. So how do we bind an instance in the cloud into an EPG? Right? So of course, what we do here is that I can use subnet. Okay, I can say that if this is your address, right, then you belong to this EPG. Possible. I can use attribute like if you belong to AP Southeast 1A, then you belong to this EPG. Right. So of course, that's another way. I can also say that if you belong to this AZ, you belong to this EPG. So I can actually map an instance to the EPG based on the IP address, based on the region, based on the zone. And in some cases, I can use multiple of them together. In the next few, we'll show you some example, right? And another approach, which I kind of find it a lot easier to use, is to use a custom application tag. Right? So in every instance that you deploy in AWS in Azure, right, you can always associate the instance, whether it's an instance, a network, anything you want, right, with a custom tag. So I can say that I create a virtual machine and I associate the virtual machine with a tag called web. So later on, as long as this instance is created, there's a tag called web, I will put you into the web EPG. Okay, so this is how we define stuff, right? How we classify stuff in the cloud. Okay, so here is some example. Right, so I want to define a cloud EPG called the development. Okay, and now I have a condition to say that, well, if you want to fall under the dev EPG, right, you must have a custom tag department into the engineering. You must be in the US West 1 or US East 1, and there is another function associated to you is that you must not be a management or IT staff. Then you can belong to the engineering department. Okay, so how we classify EPG can be based on multiple conditions, that is, and all conditions doesn't matter, right? Then I can also define another EPG called the finance EPG. Right? In this case, I'll say that department is equal to finance, and you must be in US West or US East, and this must be your IP. When you notice there's a different way of defining it, right? So what I want to, the reason we bring out this is to give you, how versatile you can go about defining EPG, how you can classify stuff in the cloud, right? So here are further example. So if you look into how we model stuff, right? So this is what we can do, right? So first of all, in the tenant, right, I create a VRF. Now a VRF can extend across multiple regions, right? Inside a VRF, I can have multiple regions, there's multiple sliders, and I can have a unique subnet. Okay, a subnet is always mapped into an AZ. Right? So this is how AWS organize stuff. Okay, so of course I can use my EPG mapping based on all this information here, no problem. Then I can use another way of mapping based on based on the criteria that you must belong to this VRF and you must belong to this EP cycle. So this is how the EPG looks like, right? Whereby I group EPG strictly based on IP address or strictly based on AP. So this is the easy way. Okay, I can do it differently. Right, I can define an EPG instead of using the subnet. I can define based on multiple tags. You say that the tag, right, is called key, and this is the value, and the EPG is called gate. So I can define multiple EPG. So in the lab exercise, you will experience some of this, right? So there are multiple permutations that you can go about doing this. So in this example, right, I can go about defining a web EPG, right? I say that my web EPG must be subnet 1 and subnet 3. Right, so this is my web EPG classification, right? I can say that my web EPG is also apply against US East and US 1. So this is actually replicating one. Likewise, I can say that my database EPG must be subnet 2 or subnet 4, or I can put it that the EPG must be in East 1 and West 1. In this case, this gives me a way to classify, right, how my web and database will look like. Right? So these are just different application use cases, different examples. Right? So this is a further approach whereby instead of mapping a subnet to an EPG, I want to map instances, right, based on the tag. So I don't want to map the EPG based on the subnet in this case. So in this case, I will say that web EPG is based on certain tag associated with web equal to EPG with the web in this case. So I define a tag, right? So this may be a reason I want to define a HA solution whereby I have the same web instance deployed across multiple AZ, right? So my web can be 10.1, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, whatever, right? I just say that as long as you have a tag to the web, you belong to this EPM. Otherwise, I do the same for the database. Right? So the rest are quite self-explanatory. Okay, so this will be one exercise that you'll be doing from now and also during the lunch break. Right? So I think you have about 1 hour or so to do the lab. Okay, so this is what you're going to define, right? You're going to create an APM in the AWS. You're going to create a front-end EPG, right? This is what you're going to define how do you associate the EPG, right, to the AWS. Okay, so that's the first part we're doing. Now after that, we're going to define things like contracts, right? How do you associate contracts to the EPG, right? So as you know by now, a contract includes filters, right? Public deny statement. A contract also includes L4 to 7 if you want to, but for the exercise, we only focus on the filter, right? There's one new term that's being introduced in the cloud API. In the normal ACI definition, right? After I define the EPG, I will say I provide one contract in the ACI, okay? But in the cloud ACI, you don't have this option. Instead, you use the EPG communication. I will say that I have one communication, and this is between the two EPG, and two is the provider, and two is the consumer. That's what it is, right? So in terms of contract, right, there is nothing new. Right? This is the same thing that we have come across. A contract is a series of permit deny statements, right? And maybe you can add a service block. Okay. So if you look into our design, this is what we intend to do. Okay. So you are going to create a web EPG. You are going to create a database EPG. Okay. And if I look from the outside to inside, right? First of all, from outside, I should be able to access the application. This is going to be TCP port 3000. Okay. I'm going to allow a remote access. So in anything wrong, I can SSH. Right. For the lab exercise, maybe we turn on ping, but in real life, don't do that. Right. This is just for the exercise. Right. So I'll turn on SSH. Right. Maybe I allow ping to pass through. Right. Then I will allow the front end to talk to the SQL database, right, using MySQL service, which is port 3306 TCP. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 arrow, 3 contracts defined and the corresponding fielders. However, I do allow the front end to talk to the outside world, everything. Why? Because we are going to upload the picture into AWS S3. Yeah? Right, your picture uploaded is going to be S3, so this is what we're going to do. Right? So this is the contract that we do. Right? So this is what we're going to go through in the lab exercise. Okay, so let me check. Okay, after this, I'll put it and then you can go and do the lab. Okay, so this is where we are now in the lab exercise. So after you, by now you should have your ACI deployed, right? For some that is a bit faster, you probably have the TG and UCSR running. Okay, so once you have all this running, these are the steps that we're going to go through in the lab exercise. So I think we will take about 1 hour for you to finish this exercise. Okay, so you're going to onboard a tenant, right? After onboard a tenant, we're going to define the cloud context profile, to define the endpoint, to define the contract. Okay, so these are the 4 major steps that we'll do. Okay, now how do you onboard a tenant? So there's an email sent to you. It's called the CAPIC tenant from the you see a tenant in the middle, right? Over here, this is your login information to go to the tenant. At this stage, you may not have to go in, not important. What that's important is this here. You need the AWS account ID, you need the AWS key, and the secret. Right? You need to get this handy in place. Right? So all this is already sent to you already. Right? So in terms of task-wise, for actual definition, you need to create admin API key and secret for the tenant. So this is referring to the tenant, not that info. Right? Then I need to take this information, right, input onto the Cloud APIC, so that Cloud APIC now can assume administrator role to configure stuff on the tenant account. Okay, this is how you do it. You can go to IAM again. You don't have to do it; it's done for you already. Go to IAM. So this is for the tenant account. You go to IAM. Okay, you select users, you create access key, and this will give you this key ID and the secret. Okay, this information is sent to you by email. Similar to the SSH I talked about earlier. This secret access key that's created for you, you must save it somewhere. Right? Once you get out of this window, the secret will be gone. You cannot download anymore. Right? So you must save it. So in the event you lost it, you must delete and create again. Right? By default, AWS only allow you to create 2 keys per user. Okay, so that's what we need. So we need to have this information. You need to have the key and the secret, and this information is for email. Okay, so once you have the ACI up and running, right? What you do is you go to ACI, you select create a new tenant. You call it any name you want. Okay, and once you select a new tenant, it's going to ask you for your account ID, right? this is the field that you will take from the email. You key in here. You select untrusted, right? You key in your cloud key and your secret access key into here. And once this is done, you get your tenant ready. Right? So you should expect the tenant to be shown here, right? Then you can start to provision stuff. Right? So that is what you will do. Okay. So after you have the tenant on board running, right? You're going to create the DIF, the cloud context, right? So you have to know the region you deploy, what is the site range you use, and these are the steps you need to just to create a DIF. Quite straightforward. All these are documented in the lab. Okay. So let me quickly show you how this is done. Then you can continue if you want to follow the lab. Okay. So this is your cloud APIC that you log in successfully, right? So if you have configured all the, you should see the status of this is shown here. TGW is up. Select the inter region. That will show you. You expect to see the TGW running, the CSR certification, and all these around. Okay. So for the tenant, what you do is you select application, right? Select tenant, right? So in the tenant space, I already created already. So I'll just create a new one, right? Let's get started. Right? So in terms of doing stuff in the top ACI, you can do it a two way. Okay, let me get out of it again. So you can do it two way. One way is you navigate to the left hand side. I want to create a tenant. I select tenant. Then there's an action of action. Create tenant. I want to create an EPG. I select the EPG. Then I come here. I say create EPG. So this is one way. Okay. Another way I can do is there is a small little icon at the top, right? It's kind of like an arrow and a few small circles. Right? You can select this guy, right? Then you can key in tenant, right? So the wizard will now shortlist what you want to do. You will ask, in that case, say, oh, you key in tenant, that means you want to create tenant. So this is another way. Okay. So in this case, I'll key in a name. I call it trainer something. Trainer form. Okay. And I will key in the AWS ID, right? So what do I do with the AWS ID? Let me put this side by side. All right. So you can see that this is your user tenant account, right? Creating tenant. This is the account ID. This is the key. This is the secret. So what I do is just cut and paste. Cut and paste this information over. Select untrusted. You see there's a key here. What you do is you select, cut and paste this one over. And you cut and paste this one over. Right? And once you do this, you have created the tenant. Just save. So for my setup, I will not do. I just use this for illustration. All right. Now, this information that you see here, this account ID, key, and secret can only be used one time in the cloud APIC only. So if you create another tenant with the same, it will be rejected because APIC classifies this as one tenant, and the tenant information cannot be shared. Okay, so that's how you can define a tenant. Okay, so that's what you do. So after you create a tenant, you can go ahead and start to create all the DIF and so forth. Okay, now there's also another way of doing things. We do understand. From a cloud perspective, we do understand what is the next step. So, for instance, the first thing I want to do here is I want to create a cloud contact profile. Cloud and say contact. I can either come here or I can use the left-hand side control panel. Right. So I can select, say that okay, let's create the first one. Okay. So in this case, I will call it a trainer. Again, right. I will select a tenant. I have one tenant in place. I select this tenant. I will select. So I'm creating a cloud context profile for this tenant. Now, a cloud context profile is about how do I associate a site address, right, to a region, right? So I'll select a region. In this case, Southeast 1A. Select. Okay. Then I'll select a DIF, which is this. Let me just create a new one. I don't want to use this DIF. I will call it trainer. Yeah. Okay. Let's call it DIF. Okay. So this is for Plano BI. Okay, so you can see that now I create a cloud context profile. It's mapped to a region, it's mapped to a BIF. The next thing I do is I need to say that I associate to a slider address. So this slider address is going to be something I will create out of the blue. I will just call it 10.240. I will use this. 0/16, right? And I'm going to add subnet, right, for this slider address. So I'll say that 10.24.00 is going to be the net one, and you say that this belongs to AC1, correct? Right? You want to select this one to add another one, net 2. I choose the IP address for subnet 2. Again, you can go about defining server if you want to, right? Correct. So here I'm saying that I'm going to create net 2 of this address, and it will go to AC Southeast 1B. So here I'm defining everything about the tenant, right? And remember, you must select the checkbox so that the changes will be accepted. I will select yes. Okay, I just go to the illustration. In this case, I will enable TGW, right? First, I want to use TGW. And when you select TGW, it will ask you for your BGP number. So in my setup, there's only one TGW configured. It will use 10.0.6500. Right? So if you follow the step just now, we should always do it. Right? Then the next thing I will do is I will select all the gateways that you need. Okay, so this one in your guide, you can do that shortly. Right? Then what I want to show you here is the next step. Okay, after I save, notice it's going to ask you the next thing. You have created a cloud context profile already. The next thing you can do is go about creating the app profile. Right, so you can, this guide will follow you through at least to build meaningful policies that you can start to use. Right, so it will guide you through creating the APN, creating the EPG, creating a contract and filters and so forth. Right, so this is the one that I'll tell you that I think you're going to do this next step. Now, another thing you can also do as you go into the EPG, right? Naturally, after you create EPG, it will ask you to create contract, communication, and so forth. Right? What you can also do here is that you can say create another EPG. Right, you can create another. So you have two choices. Either you continue the flow, or you just use the same flow, create another item of the same meaning. So when you create multiple contracts, multiple filters, this is where you'll be doing. Okay. So this is the guide that the UI that will walk you through. Right. So after you create all the cloud contacts, right, the next step you'll do is to go about creating all the endpoint groups, all the contract as we described earlier, right? So pay attention to all these requirements, right? So over here, checklist, go on define. What do I need to do? Right? I need to create X number of EPG. I need to create all the EPG. I need to determine how to classify them. So in this case, for the design, what we're going to do here is we're going to create an EPG called application. We'll set the tag tier is equal to front end. Okay. We'll set the database. We say that the tier is equal to DB. And then we set another EPG for the external, and we say that IP address is 00. Okay. So this is from a planning perspective, how do I do it? Okay. Now, it is important that you set the tag as tier equal to front end. Why? Because later on when we create all the test instances, all the instances will be created with the same attribute. So whatever that you define here in the tier equal to this information that you define here must match what I define in the AWS. So if you check the AWS configuration, over here you're going to see, let me look for verification. So not this page, give me a second. So if you go to AWS instance, you're going to see. So this field that you see here, tag tier equal front end, is referring to this guy, in the AWS, there's a tag field. Right, you see that in the AWS instance, I assign that a tier equal to front end as one of the labels. Okay, so this information that you see here must match this information that you see here. Otherwise, the EPG may not be associated for it. So we'll go to that later when you do the lab. Okay, so this is all we will do. So the EPG must be defined. So these are the tasks, again, very similar. These are those things that you have to configure it. You have to exercise, you define all the EPG, you define the classification. After that, you can follow this. This is giving all the information here. Then you start to define content. Okay. Now, this diagram is important. Okay. So after this, I will let you go and configure the lab. We will continue back in about 1 hour time. Okay. You need to understand the traffic flow. So what we have here is that for external to the internal front-end application. Right? So this is going to be TCP 3000, right? 3000. Okay. Front end to the SQL service is going to be TCP 3306. Okay. So these are those things that normally when you communicate to the application guys, this is the furthest detail they can share with you. Okay. And this is all traffic because this guy needs to go to S3. Right, you can also configure this guy to go outside if you want to, right? Then also remote access from outside to inside. So this is going to be TCP 22. Right? If you want to, you can also enable ping. Right? So these are the different contracts that's required. Right? You need to configure this. Right? So you go through a UI to configure this. So this is the further illustration. These are the contracts that's needed. Right? So it shows you the relationship. I mentioned to you in ACI Cloud API, right? We brought in a new concept called the EPG communication. So this is the EPG communication that we talk about here, right? There is an EPG consumer, there's an EPG provider, and this is the contract associated. Right? So you can define all these things, okay? So you can define the filters. Right? So this is the list of filters that you need to define in your lab. Right? Okay, you can follow through that. There's always a checklist, right? So the checklist is done for you in the lab, but this is more for your real life implementation of it, right? Then you define the filters, define the contract, and define the combination. Right? So after that, that pretty much finish everything. Okay. So once you finish, we can start to test. You can just tell me that you have configured stuff. I can also do the instance creation for you to test. Okay. So what do you expect to test? So if you can get the stuff working, okay, which will take about 1 hour. Estimated. Okay, you will take the IP address of this guy, and this is created on the fly. Right? You can take this IP address between 3000. Right? This is to show that your policies are defined correctly. Okay, so you do not have to create this instance manually. Right? In the lab guide, I provide the steps on how you do it, how you define the tag. But to save you time, I can automate this for you. So what you need to do is once you finish, once you're ready to test, you just need to ping on the team space that you need port number to be ready. I will just initiate for you. It just take 1 or 2 minutes for this to be ready. Okay. So that's all I have prepared for the lab session. So from now until can we spend about 1 hour up for lunch and the lab finish?
Okay, so we should resume at 2, I think.
Yes, I will be online, but now it's for you to continue the lab. Anything not sure, you can ask me. Right? I will start MSO at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so I think everyone, you can take your time to have a quick lunch, or you can also balance the time for doing the lab. So we will resume the next section, right, at 2 p.m. 1.5 hours later. Yeah.
Singapore time. Okay, so for other country, you have to change your time accordingly. Okay, so once you have made some progress, please post your screen capture onto the web so we know how you're progressing. If you need any help, please also put onto the web page. I will respond to you. Okay, so it's kind of lab and lunch together. You manage your own time, right? So your end goal by 2 o'clock, right, is to be able to have an instance created, and you can do this. So what I can do with this app is hold on, let me let me change the screen back to a bigger. It's hard to use. Okay, let me show you some fun. Okay, so this is your application that you deploy. Just let me know. So you assume that I'm the application team. Then you say that your network is ready, I can start the test. So what I will do is I will just create the VM and test, right? So first thing I'll do is I will log in. So what you can do is you need to create, you can sign up. So this is a simple demo. So I will call it a 123@cisco.com. You can call it any name, doesn't matter, right? This is just a fake one. You can define anything you want, okay? I'll call it test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Put something like okay. Right. So this will create a user ID for 123 ASEAN. So I log in now. I log in. Right? So you can see that it says that welcome ASEAN CAP. Right. So this is actually connecting to the database to put back your name and so forth. Right. So this is the first part. So I want to test that it's actually working, talking to the AWS S3. I can upload a photo, right? So you can upload any favorite picture, right? But remember, this is going to be you need to post this onto the screen. So what you do is you look for a picture, which I have prepared some picture earlier. Okay, let me look for this unknown a picture of something, right? I choose a picture, I upload. Okay, after upload, I can come to view photo, right? So this will show me. I need to check. Maybe I make some mistake. Okay, negative demo. I'll show you that later. So after I upload successfully, I should be able to see some image. Give me a second. Let me log in with a different ID. I think I made a mistake. Let me use the test account. Okay, you don't need to upload the picture, which is a JPEG file. Right? So you can see that I have all the pictures being uploaded. Okay, so this is how it looks like. Okay, so what you do is that by 2 o'clock, hopefully you can get this working. Okay. Okay, anyone with question, you can post on the screen, you can unmute. I can try to solve it. Okay, we'll resume at 2 p.m. Singapore time. I hope we can be on target.
Okay, so we see everyone back at 1.5 hours time.
There's no lab extension. Sorry. But this one is a real cost incurred on my department, so I cannot run this forever. In fact, every port will cost about 50 US a day. So I cannot let it run forever. But anyhow, if you really need to continue, you have a few options. One way is you can take the same instruction I give to you. You can create your own. You can follow